Eyes on Whiteness is a podcast that illuminates the insidious and ignorant ways of whiteness, regardless of intent. Our guests are invited to practice the work of transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy, as these constructs are pervasive and ever-present for all of us.
I'm Diedra Barber Vasquez, Black and Puerto Rican, lesbian, New York, Californian, living in the Southwest, mother to dog child Onyx, cis woman. I am my own, I am my mother's, I am Earth's, I am you.
And I'm Maureen Benson, a white, straight, cisgender woman living in Oakland, California, doing my best to be a principled accomplice for racial justice in these apocalyptic times. I also hella love my dogs, Wagyu and Philly.
In Season 2, we're excited to share with you a series of incredible conversations with extraordinary guests that we invite to engage the question, what does it look like to be an intersectional integrity?
We want to thank our brilliant and kind producer, Aaron Rand Freeman. And don't forget, if you'd like to support us, we do appreciate it. You can find us on Patreon, Eyes on Whiteness, and you can rate and leave a review anywhere you're listening to the podcast. Welcome to the show. Hey, Diedra.
Hi, Maureen.
Welcome back, everybody. We are here for Season 2.
Whoop, whoop.
Wow, it's been a year.
It has. It has. Yeah. It's been a year.
Well, I'm really excited to welcome everybody back into, Season 2. We're digging into intersectional integrity. Buckle up.
What a ride it's been, huh? Yeah. So we're offering folks a very different Season 2, wouldn't you say? Different but the same?
I would say more about different but the same.
Well, I mean, I think the Season 1 was around just having conversations with folks doing some really awesome things in the world. And we're doing that again with a very specific lens of asking folks to have a conversation with us about this idea of intersectional integrity.
It's quite a season, so I hope folks are excited, as excited as we are. I am really excited because the lineup of guests is just extraordinary. We have so many different brilliant minds and different folks that are walking the world in different identities. So already beginning to just bask in the glory of these amazing conversations. So yeah, very excited.
Yeah, and excited as well. Inspired and humbled and in gratitude that they're going to give us their time. It's going to be great.
Mm-hmm. What are you excited about for this season of conversations?
That's a good question. I think just hearing how people are moving through, having a chance to have conversation with people, how they're moving through these times, you know, particularly with people who forever, the world is forever changed from 2020 on, right? That's a marking point, a significant marking point, which is really beautiful, I think, to be alive during this time. And also the way that I think of it is we're in the age of Aquarius, and what does that mean? And so I think having 2020 happen when it was already foretold that we would be experiencing some real transformative shifts and changes in how people move and think. And I think having conversations with folks within that context, and then having conversations with folks who are explicitly wanting to explore what does it mean to live the theory I might believe in, right? What does it mean to engage in the world explicitly, not necessarily like an explicitly doesn't mean imperfection, right? But just explicitly with the intent to be more conscious almost. Like, I think
Hmm.
although people may not be using the term that you and I use of transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy, I think that that can uh, be executed in different ways.
Hmm.
And so having conversations with people who are doing that, I think from different lenses and perspectives and identities will
Mm-hmm.
be really illuminating.
Mm-hmm.
you know from the I tend to learn more when I can have conversations with folks around specifically this stuff.
Yeah.
And then also just hoping that it offers people who people who are listening or watching who also want to transmute white supremacy in their daily,
Mm-hmm. In the
what it
daily.
might look like.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really easy to follow and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you see it explicitly and sometimes it's not. That's life. Sometimes it's really subtle, and sometimes it's not. That's the thing I would say. Like, I think we're living in a times where I think people might I think things are more gross than they are subtle.
Mm.
And the more I'm transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy, the more I notice that.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
more I notice that those who are not transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy don't even see the gross as the gross. It's really interesting. So
What do you mean by gross?
like extreme, like, so it's not subtle, it's just in your face. So it's like, I think there's a large population of folks who are like have a really hard time translating the way that the connection between Trump supporters, anti-vaccination, and white supremacy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's really gross. It's really in your face, but there's a lot of people who genuinely cannot see the connections.
Yeah.
They cannot see that connection. It's wild, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the reality. It's a diverse world we live in, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I think that like, it's an extreme example, but that's our reality. So I think
Yeah.
having conversations with people around the different ways that folks are attempting to, whatever word they're using, dismantle, confront, disengage from white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, all the isms, all the phobias, I think can help people have a better understanding, particularly when it's could be gross for one person and subtle for another, or subtle for one person, gross for another. Like, seeing that perspective, I think, can be helpful for each of us in our own experiences to walk the path that we might want to walk. So that excites me. I think the possibility of the podcast offerings doing that for folks is exciting to me.
I like it. I love that you use the word gross, and appreciated that you defined it, because I went to a judgment place. I was like, it is gross.
Well, yeah, that's the beauty of language, right? Like, that too.
Yeah.
What are you excited about?
I'm really excited to learn. I think I know that this season we're really being intentional about bringing in folks who have a variety of different identities and lived experiences, and the common one of the common threads among our guests this season is a stated commitment that is very much in alignment with transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy. Like you said, they might call it something different. So I'm really excited to learn, because to use your point, what might be gross for someone, an Indigenous person, an activist who navigates disability justice, things that might be gross or glaring for them might be really subtle for me. So I'm really excited to learn, to get to be in these intentional conversations with folks who live different identities than I do. I feel really grateful that folks this season are down to come on and share their perspective. And also I am really excited to be in conversations with folks where we normalize intersectional integrity, where we're normalizing that as a way of being. I'm just ridiculously excited about the conversations we're going to have with our guests this season, to really dig into the multiple ways that folks explore this concept, this intention of intersectional integrity. There are just, we were really, really, really blessed with a lineup of incredible people that have said they would come and have these conversations with us from so many different perspectives and lived experiences and ways that they're being in the world. So I'm just juiced for this season. How about you?
Ditto. Yeah, I'm I find learning through others the best way for me to evolve and grow. So I really love the idea of hearing how people are as we've discussed in our own exploration of what words mean and redefining words, like how other people are defining intersectional integrity, even when they either are using a different term, or like there's an aha moment when we invite them and they're like, oh yes, I've been thinking about that, but hadn't put it to words, and just exploring that. And again, like, I think that's part of I'm excited because we spend so much time on what's not working. I really need to be looking at what is working, right? I've been talking about this author a lot lately, but because every time I read one of her, I do like a chapter maybe every few months, and they're always so good. Sherry Mitchell's book, Sacred Instructions. I just read her book about teachers and teaching. And no. I think it was about how white supremacy took on the idea of law of attraction. And the need for that. Like, that's where our society was, but moving into this idea of law of abundance. And so this idea of 80-10-10, right? Spending 10% of your time on what's not working, 10% of your time of seeing those who are impacted by what's not working, and 80% of our time thinking about focusing on what we want to see working, right? What we're envisioning, what are we creating, because because thoughts do have power, right? So if we're spending all of our time just in how fucked up the world is, where's the time to create something different? Where's the time to imagine, to see the people who are in real time doing something different or trying to create less harm in the world? So I'm looking forward to being in conversation with people who are doing just that, right? And imagining, what it is, and conversations with folks that I'm like, what the fuck just happened? I feel like I just got run over, or like, wow, that was awesome. Like, I feel it totally resonated, right? Or like, whatever it is, like, that's the world of this that I want to create. Let's have the conversation, whether we're in agreement or not, or on the same train tracks or not, like, whatever. So that's what I'm super looking forward to, just learning about others, learning from others, and evolving.
Diedra, what's intersectional integrity?
Intentional engagement and relationship development with self, the I, others, the they, them, or we, and earth, us, the animals, planets, waterways, landmasses, right? So the intentional engagement and relationship development with self, others, and earth that is dynamic, fluid, and mindful of varying identities. Intersectional integrity is the art and act of intentionally being introspective, self-aware, vulnerable, and transparent in communication choices. This mindfulness explicitly includes amending the soil components of honoring commitments to the process, especially when it's hard, being vigilant in centering non-normalized perspectives, acknowledging alternate realities, perspectives exist while interrogating power and privilege, moving from a growth mindset to assist in establishing and building personal accountability when we engage others, ourselves, and the earth or world as a whole. So I think my biggest takeaway with intersectional integrity is this idea that I'm engaging the world from a place, a very heartful, mindful place, that I've done some individual work first, right? Some individual work, meaning some introspection, some self-awareness, an ability to be at least vulnerable and transparent with myself, and moving toward being vulnerable and transparent with others, as I'm engaging in the world, as I'm communicating with another person or a group or the larger community about my perspective or my engagement, my experiences, my triggers, my joys, like all those things, that I'm being aware of how my I is engaging, influencing the other eyes that I might be around. And to me, that's what I think intersectional integrity is that there's a mindfulness around that I'm not self-absorbed. I'm not stuck in white supremacy construct of rugged individualism and competition, that I'm really engaging in a mindful way that is about honoring not only my own experiences, but trying to hold space and honor the experiences of other people, whether they are similar or not. That's what I love. That
as it's almost like an intention, right? To honor your experiences and others, regardless of similarity, with a deep, profound mindfulness. That's a beautiful intention for how to live in the world.
And I've recently started moving to adding, like, being very intentional about heartful, because I think mindfulness, even that, like, I'm reaching a point where intersectional integrity means I'm like dissecting everything and the choices that we make. And I think even this movement of mindfulness, that which I think is a beautiful thing that's been, happening more and more into the mainstream for the past decade or so, is still situated in a very Western idea of the masculine intellect over the feminine intuition. And so for me, it's, yes, I want to be mindful. I also want to be very heartful, meaning I want to be equally as present in my mind about what's occurring as I am in my heart about what I'm feeling. Trying to find a balance there,
That's beautiful. That's a powerful transmutation of white supremacy and patriarchy. In and of itself, I'd never thought about mindfulness centering the head and how it can very quickly not invite us to be in the heart. That's amazing. What helped you to that awareness of the distinction, mindfulness and heartfulness, and the balance of that, the quest for balance?
Yeah, totally. When you and I started really thinking about, what project did we want, right? What kind of collaboration did we want? And we wanted it based in authentic, us both bringing our authentic selves, and what that looks like, right? As individual, like, I think there were a lot of things that we were doing that we didn't know we were doing until we sat down and we were like, let's start naming it, right? And that's how this idea of transmuting white supremacy came about, at least in my experience. And like, we started really being intentional in naming it. And I think, that's now, I keep saying 3 years, but I think now it's getting like 4 or 5 years ago that we started this, right?
What is time?
But I mean, no, and I don't say that as like, it's a problem in any way, but I say that it is that, we talk about this being ever evolving process, right? And that, and it has been a journey and it continues to be a journey. And so I think when we first started, there were ways in which we were moving with each other that I really liked and didn't see replicated in other places or other relationships, right? So for me, that's what I wanted to really figure out. What is that about? Not only to potentially make a job out of it so that I could like make a living out of something I love, but also to have a better understanding. And so out of that meant these ideas that were coming to us primarily from what I knew at the time, right? We don't know what we don't know. And I am very Western educated. I am very much of the world of things are, the headier they are, the more intellectual they are, the more value they have. And so I think that colored the beginning process of this, and I still think the process is necessary. The skills are necessary of introspection, self-awareness, vulnerability, transparency, intersectional inquiry, and invoking collectivism. Those are all necessary processes to understand and move through from the I to be in a less harmful relationship with others. And as I've done that work, there were certain things that it just felt like it was uneven, almost like it just didn't seem, there was something that was not balancing out. And for me, that became where are the places where I created this from a very Western dichotomy of like very academic, and these ideas are situated in a process, even though I'm not linear, but it kind of became, at first it was sort of linear. And what I found for me as I was transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy, for me, I realized that I was not really even looking at any other pieces of me that are not the intellect, that are not the mind, that are not that we have attributed to masculine qualities. And so for me, the process has been to come back around to what's the other side of that, right? In our society. And I think that's, when you and I first started doing this work, a lot of it was just white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy. And that's kind of why for me, I started saying, oh, we got to put patriarchy in here. When I started doing like, why do I feel lopsided and I'm doing all this great work? I realized it's because I'm not even thinking about, looking at the intuitive side, the feeling side of this, that my feelings are of value just as much as my intellect and my ability to string words together. And so that's when I started thinking this in terms of, oh, there's another side to this. And so really digging into, like falling in, like really allowing myself to fall deeply into what is this thing patriarchy, and really getting an understanding of, how do Black women speak about this, that have done talks or written books or articles or whatever, right? And white women and Asian women and Native American women, and just seeing what are the different ways that this is being spoken of, to help me sort of see how do I want to incorporate transmuting patriarchy as well. And I think part of that is moving into an understanding that remembering the feeling side of this, which I think is even harder because it's, at least for me, I'll speak from the I, it has been even harder because even though white America doesn't want to, from my experience, doesn't really want to engage anti-racism, like truly, really, they're willing to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about patriarchy, right? If you talk about patriarchy, you're like this crazy man-hating woman who likely is a lesbian, this bullshit. Like, it's really intense. So that pulled me in even more, right? So starting to do that work in a real deeper level from the I. And that then me realizing, oh, the other part that was missing was the balance of my spirit to my intellect. Yeah. And for me, spirit comes in through the body. Mm-hmm. And so now that's what, so now 5 years later, and I'm truncated. It was a long story on here, but sure. Truncated quite a bit of it. Now and this is like recently, like a week ago. So like year 1 to year 5, I'm like, oh, I don't want to just say mindful. I want to be very intentional and say it is both heartful and mindful work, because it's both. Much of the things that I'm learning about how to transmute white supremacy and patriarchy, it's not only the thoughts that come in my head that help me know that here's a moment that maybe could be transmuted. It's also things that happen in my body. And for me, often it's the throat, when I know I'm not speaking my voice and it gets stuck in my throat, or I feel it in my stomach, which would be like my solar plexus when I'm not accessing my agency or inner power. So those are all signs that kind of tell me, oh, these are moments to transmute. Yeah. So, wow. Long way to answer your question, Maureen.
We got nothing but time.
Ashe, yeah.
That's beautiful. Wow. Thank you for sharing. That's so exciting to me, to create that intentionality as an act of transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy, to be mindful and heartful. And I also hear you surfacing a benefit of that mindfulness, in that we talk a lot about folks tapping into the body and being aware of somatic cues. And so like, it feels really, I was going to say polished, but that's not really what I want to say. It feels developed that you're honoring the value of being heartful is then listening to your body, which is giving you cues. So to say my throat closes up when I'm not speaking my voice, right? To like, that's a very clear way to listen to your body. That to me feels really different than, a time where when my throat was closing up, it would not mean that. It wouldn't be a message of, action other than fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? It would mean something that I should like step back, as opposed to your body giving you some really powerful advice, right? Like, what does it look like to value, which I think you're touching on, like to redefine the value of leadership, or, like redefining leadership entirely, right? Like leadership and like, because our course is called Cultivating Intersectional Leadership. So I just want to be really explicit, like everyone is a leader. Like we are leaders in our own being. We get to lead and have choice and agency over how we want to live our life. That's what I mean by that leadership, to move it from it's all in the head to the heart, and that benefit of just being in community with your body is that's really inspirational.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
Being in, that finding that balance, I think they're between honoring both my mind / intellect and my heart / feelings, like being in balance and honoring that they're both giving me messages on how to access my most authentic self, I think is huge. Like it's not the end all be all, because then there's, we have to learn what is the best way to be my authentic self, right? That is, now it's like also part of that is like, which I think that's the transmutation is really important, because I want to arrive as my authentic self that is in process of healing, that is able to access the intention of doing less harm in the world. Because I think, sometimes our authentic selves are harmful. And I'm not judging that. Like, I get it. Like, I fucking get it, I get it. Like, this idea we were talking about earlier, this idea of like, I think about intersectional integrity in my relationship to my ancestors. And for me right now, it's about addressing the harm caused by the harm caused. So being able to have an authentic healing process with the choices and decisions my family made, my grandparents made in particular, on both sides of my family, in their engagement of me as a human. Being able to have that, and they're all but one is passed, but I still being able to engage them and speak to the harm I experienced, but being able to do it with forgiveness. And the only way that I can do that is with a remembering of the reason they engaged with me the way they engaged with me, the harm, is because they were harmed. And that's intersectional integrity to me, right? Like holding all of that while also determining whether or not I just want to yell at them or
Sure.
And just be angry, or yell at them, be angry, and forgive.
There's a difference in understanding why it happened, which is in the head, and honoring the feelings and generating empathy and compassion, right? Like there's a lot of feelings, like anger and sadness and upset are also, I don't want to say valid, are also very real and authentic feelings. And would imagine that what comes with that is the ability to access and tap into compassion and empathy, and then forgiveness, as opposed to being in the head feels like I can rationalize it. Like I can intellectually understand why people who have been abused are abusers. That doesn't live anywhere below my jaw. That's all up here in my head. So to tap into where that lives in the body means honoring all the feelings, the multitude.
Totally. And that's where I think, I've been with clients recently, I've been really trying to slow down in this work of transmuting white supremacy and just get people to think about the first 4 skills of introspection, self-awareness, transparency, and vulnerability. And I think part of that is because in order to even get to that, at least for me, my process has been, in order to even dip my toes in at this point, I don't know when this will air, but at this point, in order to even dip my toes in the idea of forgiving my family for the harm, there's work, there's introspection, self-awareness, vulnerability, and transparency work that I have to do with myself to even step into the forgiveness because I'm so angry, right? Or because there's a rage, I'm either angry at them or there's a rage I have for society. And so that's for me, that's the that's really, it's been really key in transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy, because it allows me to do some ancestral healing that would not be available to me otherwise if I stayed just in the rage for the rage itself, right? Instead of the rage being an impetus to acknowledge what's happened and the ways in which it has influenced how I then, the relationship I have with myself first and foremost. But that takes, it's taken a lot of introspection and self-awareness. Just looking at I can point the finger outward and talk about how someone is not is not in integrity, is definitely not in intersectional integrity in their relationship to me. And without introspection and self-awareness, be unable to really see or feel the agency I have with an influence in my reaction or response to what I am experiencing as a lack of intersectional integrity. And that, which I think is, it's so, for me, my experience of white supremacy, it's so opposite, right? It's just constantly pointing the finger outward and everyone else is to blame. Or if I do take any of the blame, it's self-shaming. I'm just shaming. And of course it's because I'm not worthy and I haven't proven myself. And so taking all that out requires a level of introspection and self-awareness and vulnerability and transparency with myself about what I remember, what the history is, to even get to that place of forgiveness for them and for myself.
Right. Right.
It's such a beautiful journey. It's tough. It's tough, but every time it's tough, but it feels better. It feels better than when I'm outwardly blaming, even though thought distortions and my mind might tell me otherwise. I'm curious for you, Maureen, what does intersectional integrity mean? We know the definition, but what does it mean for Maureen?
I am super eager to answer that question, and I swear to God I'm going to answer that question, but I have to say one thing I'm really moved by.
Yeah.
I really love, I had never thought about until this moment the idea of starting in the I and moving to the we as anything other than the living, existing we's, the other beings that I lay eyes on. And so I had been really clear, starting with in my own work so that I can show up and do less harm and be more mindful, and now brilliantly explained heartful in my interactions with other beings, that I can see and like physically see in front of me. What I love about what you just said is that, you know, I often talk about the pendulum, and I feel like there's the pendulum that helps us get to balance, but there's also what you're illuminating is this pendulum of going back into ancestor work, like looking at the I, but that the we's include the ancestors. And then when that pendulum to swing back, then there's we's that include living beings as we define living. So let me not say ancestors aren't living, right? But like as normalized
embodied,
society might say.
That's what I say.
Embodied. Okay. Awesome. That's so powerful, because that to me really gets at what interrupting a cycle of harm must include. Because how can you, like you said, like hurt people, right? Like, so there's a way in which you can tap into compassion and forgiveness by moving out of the head space of understanding and into the heart space of understanding harm that has happened. But how can we even begin to interrupt the ways in which we have been taught harm without both moving back and having that forgiveness and compassion, and also then being intentional, mindful, heartful with the living beings that are embodied in a physical realm in front of us? So I'm just really appreciative of yet another pendulum, which almost feels then like a divination, right? Like that like a pendulum just goes in one direction back and forth, but like it actually can move around in lots of different circles and in different directions. And so I just really appreciate the example you're offering to honor the complexity and nuance and tap into, for me anyway, it's like, I'm intellectually bought into ancestor work. I don't feel like I have deeply dug into my own personal ancestor work. And so when, sometimes when for me things get activated that I don't have experience around, it can quickly go into like disbelief. And so I'm just aware of like my own work around like aligning my head and my heart. Like in my head, I really get it and I value it. And in my heart, I don't have the heartful experience of the power of that, and you just sharing vulnerably helped me to move into my body around that. So I'm just really like, I can feel it in my heart, I can feel it in my chest, like filling up, like, oh, that makes so much sense. We're always so quote unquote forward. I'll speak in the I, but I think societally I am always so forward moving that to think about the impact on the I to move into ancestor and past harms from a place of, just deeply understanding in my head and my heart, both helps the I heal, but also impacts the ability for us to interrupt the cycle of harm and how we move forward. So thank you for that. That feels like I just wanted to acknowledge the gift of that learning before I jump in with my answer. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing that.
So what is intersectional integrity to me? You know, I remember sitting on my front porch area talking about this with you, like when we began this concept of putting words to something that we, you know, I was definitely like living and attempting to live, but had never really put words to it. And I remember, you know, integrity, if I take out intersectionality for a moment, integrity for me, a lot of folks assign like a moral judgment, like it's a tool, like if I'm either in integrity or I'm out of integrity, and that's something that's wrong or right. And for me, it was redefined maybe about 10 or 11 years ago in a way that made a lot more sense, that it was about, if you think about the spokes on a wheel, and if one of the spokes is broken, the other spokes have to pick up energy work, right, in order to maintain the integrity, the structural integrity of the wheel. And that visual has always really helped me to, it's not like that helps me move out of right or wrong into working and not working, like, because eventually the other spokes are going to break, right? And so when I think about in sitting on the front porch with you and being in relationship with you, a Black queer woman with multiple identities that are targeted in ways that I have non-targeted identities, I began thinking about like, oh, well, what does it mean to be intentional to hold space when like your spoke breaks. Maybe that's probably not like what I want to say, but like that there's a way that I like to honor.
Or you can think of like one of my spokes are at capacity.
Yeah, right.
That's yeah.
And it's at a different capacity than mine because we have
Yeah.
different identities, right? And so what does it look like to be mindful of that and not have any judgment, in fact, to honor that feels like a really normal part of the process, given the social constructs of race and the social constructs of many of the identities that we speak at. So to me, it didn't have the same charge in the moment where you and I were having a really real conversation around something that you had been in silence around, and maybe it was shame or not wanting to share that, like, because it was like, I think my memory of it, and feel free to jump in around it, but my memory of it was that it was something you didn't feel comfortable talking about because you felt like you weren't holding up your end of the bargain, right? And I didn't think about it that way at all. I was just like, well, for example, the day Toni Morrison died, and you needed time and space. And even though we had, work, quote unquote, on the calendar, like, I was like, oh, of course that's impacting you in a way. Like, I'm sad, but it's not impacting me in the same way that it impacts you. Like, grieve, fam. Like, take the time to grieve. Like, we don't have to sit on the calendar. And I offer that as like a simple example of a way that, like, I was just like, oh, like, of course I'm going to, like, make space for you to be exactly as you are, even if I don't understand it in the same way that you understand it. Like, that's a great example of, like, I was mindful of that, but I don't feel that in the same way you do, right? So that was where it sort of began, like putting words to it. But I think for me, intersectional integrity is really just honoring the being of us, like that context and lived experience impacts us differently on different days. And what does it look like to actually just see, I want to say human, but if we're being intersectional, there's more than human beings on this planet, right? And so what does it look like to have a collective responsibility that we all thrive? And I take that really seriously. Like, I take it really, really seriously, like particularly in the communities that I'm in as a white woman, in communities of color. Like, what is my responsibility that's not equal responsibility? It's an equitable responsibility. So does that mean more? Does that mean stepping back and, contributing but not controlling? Like, and just honoring that there's no set answer. But being in an intersectional integrity, I don't know how to phrase it as like an adjective, but like being in an intersectional integrous, that's not the word, but like being in relationship while centering the intention of intersectional integrity, I guess is how I would say it. Like, and just being cool with, I don't know what that looks like all the time, but I'm going to show up, and so holding space for you to show up exactly as you are, whether you're ready to share something or not. Like, there's no should or supposed to. It's like, when you're ready to share that you were withholding something, awesome. And then we can talk about that. Like, that took a while, and so like not having judgment around that. Like, Diedra, come on, like, you should have been able to talk to me about that. Like, no, because I don't know. You're ready when you're ready, So I think it looks a variety of different ways in a variety of different situations. Finding the place that I have capacity and being mindful of, kind of that balance of, do I have capacity because of the ways in which I have non-targeted identities and I have power and privilege? Do I not have capacity because of the ways I have targeted identities and I'm impacted, right? Like, I remember after Trump was elected, I didn't have capacity for a while because a rapist was in charge. And that was really traumatizing. And also, it wasn't in competition with the exponential impact of having a white supremacist in the White House on communities of color, and a xenophobe in the White House who was going to directly target immigrants, right? Like, it wasn't in competition. It was just honoring that I too was impacted and being in the different communities that I'm in at different times to see how I can show up that honored both, what I had capacity to do and what I didn't have capacity to do, and just trust in our collective to be able to hold it down. So those are some initial things that come up for me, which I am also just really aware, if I'm being transparent, the voices in my head are already like giving me grief for not having it like spelled out in a linear way. I know, it's so funny.
I mean,
right?
you're transmuting white supremacy in terms of
Totally.
competitiveness and perfection. Right. So why not transmute it in terms of shit having to be linear? There's no like
100%. Yeah. No, and I'm grateful too, like, because intersectional integrity for me is also being aware of the voices that want to run the narrative, but not letting them run the show. Right. So I'm saying
the vulnerability to say it aloud. Yeah,
that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm sort of saying it aloud to not give it power, right? To almost bring some levity to it, because that, I feel like that lacks that intersectional integrity to try to have it all together. Like, I got to figure it all out by myself before, that's why I resisted the word polished. Right, like it's not. It doesn't have to.
I appreciated how you caught you caught yourself in that. Yeah, that's the work. Yeah, I think like people forget that. I think that some of the things that you and I are learning as we go through this journey together is that there are certain reminders that we have to give ourselves, that we have to also remember to give people we're sharing this process with. Is that sometimes I use the wrong pronoun. Sometimes sometimes I forget that there's being an American, that there's perspectives outside of Latinx, Black people, white people, that like and it's the ability to own that and say like, oh yeah, I don't want to. My brain wanted to use the word polish, and the active way of transmuting white supremacy is stopping and using a different word instead of hoping nobody heard, right? Or beating myself up for using the word and getting stuck in rumination that I fucked up, but owning it and learning from it and moving on. Yeah. So I appreciate that feels you showing that.
Thanks. I mean, I was going to say that feels like a level of personal accountability as it relates to, like being on this podcast, right? So when, like, it's funny because like when I go through the editing process, and you and I have talked about this, like we're intentional about not, for the most part, not cutting out those pauses where someone might say, oh, I don't really want to say this, but this is sort of what I'm thinking, like leaving that in the space as opposed to what people would perceive as a well-produced show that like cuts out all the ums and the ahs, and and I'm not saying we don't do some editing, but I think it's really important to name the act of transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy is nuanced, and that sometimes there's intention in leaving that there so that folks can hear someone grappling with it. And so that's what calls me to say that sometimes, where you'll hear me say that a lot, like I don't really want to say this, but that's what's coming to mind. So like, I guess thank you for holding the space to you, Diedra, and also the listeners, while like someone's saying that aloud. And what does it look like for us to normalize that? To normalize, the one thing my partner and I were talking about recently was the ways in which we have normalized not having any pauses in conversation, like which for me, I'll speak in the I, doesn't hold space for me to think and work through what I actually want to say with the tools and the lenses that I want to be intentional about. Like if I'm just left to fill the space quickly, then what that does is it forces me into my default way of thinking. And I'm very clear, I'm spending a lifetime of unindoctrinating myself into my default way of thinking, which is riddled with white supremacy and patriarchy. Mm-hmm. And so I need that space. I need that grace from others. And I'm going to bookmark, though, not depending on emotional labor of folks who have targeted identities where I hold non-targeted identities, right? So there's ways in which I need some space to work out some things. And the balance is not burdening folks who also have needs with the emotional labor to hold me. And so that's like another way of intersectional integrity that I'm present to of, I have needs and you have needs. And so how do we come together with an intentionality that disrupts the ways in which white supremacy and patriarchy will have us just fall into a pattern where those who have more targeted identities do more of the work, right? Like, and those who have non-targeted identities are doing less of the work. And it can feel like, kind of coming back to capacity, sometimes for me, unpacking my whiteness is really fucking hard. And sometimes in some moments, I don't have the capacity to hold down others. And at the end of the day, what do I need to do so that I can get back to a place of having capacity? That's intersectional integrity. Like, it is on me, starting in the I, so that I can show up in a you know, in right relationship is a phrase I've heard that feels really aligned with intersectional integrity for me. Like, how do I show up in right relationship in communities of color, in queer communities, as a person who doesn't identify as queer? Like, how do I show up in right relationship? And one of the ways is being accountable for myself to do my own work that I can do. But it also means, like you and I were just talking about this before the show today, like, it doesn't mean I got to go figure it all out by myself and I'm in isolation, right? So what does it look like to be in relationship with you where it's not like I never ask for any support? I just want to be mindful of creating a balance that works, that doesn't just default to, well, Diedra, like, you're the one holding it down because I can't keep it together, which I have seen in a lot of institutions and I've seen in a lot of relationships, right? Gender plays out, race plays out. And so it's another messy, like, I don't have a clear answer for it, but it is a great place to practice that mindfulness and also heartfulness of, like, is there an imbalance here? And what is my responsibility to begin with the I, to do my own work, but also, like, really authentically be in relationship, because that reciprocity in relationship is also really valuable. So it's not like any of the Black women I'm in relationship with don't also take care of me, right? Like, that's not, it's not like I just show up like I'm a martyr and I hold it down for everyone. Like, that is a constant awareness of, because that's not, I think there's a way that the intellectual analysis only of intersectional integrity would be like, okay, so white folks need to have their shit together and show up perfect and polished to be in relationship with people of color, and don't ever fucking cry, and don't ever have any needs, because Black people have enough of their own work to do in the world. Like, that's not what I'm saying. And also, don't dump all over Black people, right? Like, so it's the both and of that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. There's so much that you said, and I'm not taking notes because I just wanted to be really present, but, like, I hate when I don't take notes because I can't remember everything. But no, I love, so when you said right relationship, I have to say I'm not in disagreement with right relationship, but there was something about it that it was like, for me, we talked about before, there was something about that I was like, oh, I bookmarked. I got to come back to that, because being a born and raised New Yorker American, for so long, my right hand has been judgment. So, I try to, it's not that I don't do it, but I try to be really cognizant of when I'm thinking about anything just in terms of right or wrong, even in terms of justice, because even our understanding of justice is within the context of Western thought here in this country. So there's still a lot of problematic pieces around how we think about justice. So I was thinking, my thoughts were, as I was listening to, I was like, oh, I wonder if it's more about being in balanced relationship, not right relationship, but balanced relationship, right? So when you said that, like, is there an unbalance? And and it goes back to what you were saying of, like, we move too quickly. We move there, like, our aversion to fucking pausing and slowing down is, I think right now, is like that, is, if white supremacy had a front line and they changed through the centuries, I think white supremacy and patriarchy's frontline pawns in the chess game that is being played with our fucking core selves is urgency, right? Is false urgency and moving really quickly, because it doesn't allow us time to ask questions, right? You always say to be curious, to really, to integrate it, what's the word? What's the word? Interrogate. Thank you, Maureen. To interrogate power and privilege, but to interrogate it not from a place of blame or pointing fingers, but from a place of like understanding, like what's happening here, and how do I actually, how do I actually want to move? Not how white supremacy and patriarchy tells me I'm supposed to move as a black lesbian woman in a friendship with a white straight woman, right? And all the things that we've been told about whether or not I'm supposed to hold your tears, or whether or not you're always supposed to just shut up. Like that's all within a framework of white supremacy. And if we can't take the time to just sort of step back and see what's working, what's not working in this particular situation. What am I weaponizing? What am I not? What do I not want to weaponize in this relationship with this person, and then with the larger persons as we move into a larger collective sense of community? Then we just keep doing the same shit. It's interesting you bring that up, because I'm in a relationship with a client right now, and I just did a recording for the other thing that I'm doing that was like around commitment to the collective, right? So what's my commitment when this is for people who are like, so if people are listening to this, right, they're like, I get that. Yes, I'm down. I get this idea of intersectional integrity and I want to move that way. Or you're in circles. Like a lot of people now are in circles of like learning circles of like, how do I have less, how do I see and understand my internalized anti-blackness? Like for those of us who are black and have it internalized, or for those of us who are not black, and like, how do I see my anti-blackness and move through it? I think an important conversation in those circles with the people you're moving through with is this idea of getting first really clear from the I, where are my boundaries? Like what is happening for me? What are my triggers? And when I am triggered, or when I feel it, ouch, when I feel like when a white person has done some shit to me, or when a man has done some shit to me, or when a queer person has done some shit, or a boomer has done some shit, and my identity is opposite those things, or I think it's in contrast to those things. What supports do I need when I feel that ouch, right? And what's my commitment to helping someone learn that they've committed an ouch? And like, this is the ouch that was committed. I understand your intent was not to create an ouch. And let's talk about the impact was an ouch. And so what is that? What does it look like for us to create space for each other to fuck up? Because we're gonna fuck up, right? It's not about no harm. It's about less harm. We are in a society that is all about us harming each other. That's how we're surviving. We're surviving by constantly harming each other. So when we get into these circles where we're transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy, we have to get really clear. What's the space I'm willing to give another person as they explore and unpack their shit, right? And then the collective, like, so there's the I, and then the group of us, we come together and we get clear and transparent about what supports or space are we going to give each other. So if I'm in relationship with my white friend, and my white friend needs to fucking cry, there's an agreement that we're having, that I'm like, my internalized white supremacist, anti-white supremacist self that is indoctrinated in the idea that white people don't get to have any fucking emotions might say to me, ugh, she's crying, right? But I'm going to take the time to transmute that, to figure out like, okay, that's pain. What do I want to do with that pain? Is my response my indoctrinated self of like, I'm supposed to take care of white women? Is my response my empathetic self that's like, a human is in pain? What do I want to do? And we need to slow down, so that I need time to slow down so that I can fucking unpack and be honest of like,
that's right.
I'm pretty sure it's it's in my empathic self, and like the fact that you're hurting as a human bothers me, but I'm so stuck in my stuff that I can't be the one to be there for you. So what supports do you need? Can you go find it? Like being able to have that fucking conversation.
That's right.
Is intersectional integrity, right?
That's right. And dialogue, I want to be clear, like it isn't just, it's both from the I, boundaries, have choice and agency. And in the we, like, can I receive your truth? Right? Like, and if it's I was just with a client yesterday where I was like, look, like, no judgment. Did you need a timeout in this conversation with this other person? Can we normalize that? Like, I think you're picking up on this, a way in which we can create spaces of intersectional integrity is to slow the fuck down, is to ask for space when we need space. It doesn't mean I'm tapping out of this conversation and I'm never coming back to it. It's honoring the human, right? Which transcends the social constructs of all these identities, right? Like, that's the other thing, is like, we have these identities because we have been indoctrinated into a society of the social constructs of all of these identities. And at the end of the day, I'm saying human here in this moment, but let's transcend that to talk about beings, because ultimately, right, we're in the us that honors the planet, right? That it does require space. And I think that there is a way in which white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism and all the forms of oppression, absolutely, the pawns on the front lines are running with a false sense of urgency, are not giving us the time and space to breathe, to reflect, to hold space for each other, to build relationship, right? Like, all of the absence of all of those things is that lacks intersectional integrity. Right. The other thing that I got really clear about when you were talking is, I'm with you on right or wrong versus working and not working. I know, we talk about that a lot. We coach folks around that. And so that too, like, that the phrase right relationship for me feels aligned with intersectional integrity. And also this work requires us to redefine words that are problematic. Right? So, like, leadership is inherently a problematic word because it's hierarchical and power over. What does it look like to take the time and space to redefine leadership? Right versus wrong requires well, maybe not wrong, but like, being in right relationship to really take the time and space and go, wow, like, right really brings up judgment for me. Got it. Integrity can bring up something moral for folks. Got it. And let's take a moment. I mean, you've taught me so much about this. Can we take a pause and define what we're actually saying here? Because we're coming to the table with all sorts of assumptions and experiences that predefine these words. So if we can actually both, do the work of looking up whatever the definition is, and also have some choice and agency to fucking redefine some stuff. It's okay for the context of creating relationship, creating community, for having opportunity to hear each other. It's okay. We can take some agency to be very clear about, I may have used this word and you have a definition of that word, but that's not the definition I'm operating from. So let's pause here. It's another time to take that space. So I really have loved the work of research with you, where right, like, how many times do we look up a definition of something and there's hella problematic definitions before we can actually get to a definition that either we vibe with, right? Because that's also a construct. Like, who gets to decide what this fucking word means, right? And so empowering ourselves to really create shared definitions that are not in the dictionary. That what does that look like? Because it's just all the words are made up. It's like, I remember, like, holidays, all made up, words, all made up. So why don't we get to empower ourselves for the purpose of creating integrity, intersectional integrity, community, honoring the us? Like, we get to claim that space.
One of the things that's so true, you see it in white supremacy and patriarchy, is that history, meaning, I should say, actually, zeitgeist does this, and so it influences history, but it influences our lexicon. Is that those who have, like, we are so much of our reality is based on who won a particular war, a very violent war, and that is what defines many of the words we use. And so as a writer, I'm constantly thinking about words in that way of, like, oh, my understanding of a particular word is, whether I like it or not, housed, if I'm an English speaker, particularly in the United States, but it could be said English in other continents, but I will be specific to the United States. It's all couched in a very violent othering history. And so that's what, for me, it becomes really important to just get clear what we're talking about, or what I am talking about, or like you said, the intersectional integrity is like someone being open, that if I ask, like, you know, key tenet of white supremacy is fucking defensiveness, right? So I've learned that, like, even in conversations with people, learning to in the way of intersectional integrity is meeting people where they are, is having to say, like, I am not judging you, I'm curious, how are you defining that word? As opposed to just saying, well, how are you defining that word? There's a different response, right? People will get defensive if I'm like, how are you defining that word? And then they run into, well, I'm using right and blah, 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 this way, you know, and I'm like, okay, and that's not how I define it, right? And us meeting each other in that balanced space of, like, you know, either redefining it or getting clear that we need a different word because our definitions of it are so different that it's stopping us from having a conversation. And sometimes just remembering, like, this again, as a writer, I'm seeing, like, we will use words as a means to express our urgency. So instead of slowing down and really saying what we mean, we find a particular word that we assume speaks to what I might mean, right? So slowing down and just letting myself be as slow as I need to be to get to the what I'm trying to express, as well as slowing down and letting others, giving others the space and time they need to get to what they're trying to express, you know? And I love the spirit, because spirit brings people that I love, deeply, deeply love, into my life who talk hella fucking slow. And I'm like, I gotta transmute my shit while they're talking. Because, you know, the little voice in my head is like, fuck, could you spit it out? Could you just get to the point? You know, and that's when I know that's my little fucking white supremacy voice in the back of my head. Like, why do I need them to rush to it? Yeah. No, Diedra, you slow down. Right. And let them speak however they need to speak.
That's right.
Never ending. That, and again, another example of intersectional integrity, right? Just showing up. If my North Star is to attempt to show up in communication with in all instances at all times with the intention to do less harm to myself and to others, then that means it is a constant daily moment-to-moment practice of transmuting white supremacy and patriarchy, because that is all I know. Yeah. That is the fabric of my fucking being, having been born and raised in the 20th century United States. That's right. And, you know, sometimes that, it used to make me really sad. Now I feel really empowered. Now I'm like, oh, I fucking know it. Like, I feel like that chess game, like the pieces moved in a different way. I'm close to being like, checkmate, motherfucker. Like,
that was amazing. And also,
what you got now, white supremacy and patriarchy? Because I see you.
So now my brain is running and like, the victory, and also like, there's a beauty in slowing down and redefining victory, because victory does not have to be power over, like chess is set up, that someone has to lose. In fact, intersectional integrity is that we all win. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like that we thrive, we, the us, you know, not just humans. But there's I guess what I would just add about intersectional integrity is it's I'm laughing because you're like, what you got now, white supremacy, but it isn't really a destination. It's a way of being. You know, it's a intention that I don't know. I would be very worried about myself if I ever got to a place where I was just like popping my collar, like, oh yeah, no, I live in intersectional integrity all the time. Like,
But I do think there's sometimes where you gotta pat yourself on the back when you see things that you didn't see before, right? Like,
100%.
Otherwise, it just gets. Like, it is a never-ending journey, but without the signposts of moments to feel joy and 1,000,000%. You know, excitement that I've been attempting to see this in the moment when I'm triggered, and now I see it in the moment when I'm triggered, and instead of me triggering back, I'm asking for space. Like, that's I think that's what I mean when I'm like, what you got now, white supremacy? Yeah. Like, because white supremacy is like, okay, you know what I got now, and then the next thing happens, you know?
Right. The pendulum. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, I was offering that as an example of like the way I interpret chess to be, it's like game over, right? And so it's an opportunity to slow down and redefine. And what I'm hearing, I didn't ask explicitly, but like you expanding on that is telling me like, no, it's a moment. Like it's a moment. It's not like, right. And our life is a series of moments. So like, it's not like game over forever. It's like in this moment, I could celebrate because I transmuted white supremacy and patriarchy, and I'm going to take this redefine win, right? I'm going to take this moment of joy, which is the win, as opposed to I have dominated, I have crushed something, right? And that's, I think that really speaks beautifully to why we say transmuting instead of dismantling, which a lot of folks in these movements say is like the goal is to dismantle white supremacy and patriarchy. And that really illustrates beautifully that life is a series of moments, so we can transmute in any moment, right? By setting these intentions, by practicing these tools, by honoring that the goal is to do less harm, by, really understanding the complexity and the dynamic nature and context of life's moments, right? That it isn't like a final, that's why I was saying it's not like a final destination, but it's, for sure. You got to grab the wins, these moments of joy, and let's redefine win, right? Like what does win look like? What does, setting an intention and committing to a way of being look like? Being really clear that for me anyway, I'll just say I'm committed to a way of being, and I'm never going to feel, I'm committed to never feeling like I have achieved that way of being so that I can rest. Like, no, it's a daily practice. Like, cool, I had a great day today. I'm feeling very successful about the ways I showed up in intersectional integrity. I just want to add another way of intersectional integrity is not just the workplace, but community, but home, but within the self. In spiritual practice, thank you for illuminating that today, the work of ancestor work. Like it is a slippery slope of not letting myself get overwhelmed by the enormity of all the places to practice intersectional integrity, but to practice finding joy in these opportunities. Like I am given amazing opportunities in every moment, day to day, to practice. And just because I'm successful in different places than others or more successful in other places, sometimes isn't a lose. Right? It's just like, I'm doing my best today. I'm doing my best. I can commit to that. And sometimes doing my best is taking care of myself and focusing on the I. Sometimes doing my best is showing up in right relationship in the we, in the us. And sometimes it means coming back to the I, like we talked about earlier, like, oh, I'm having a capacity issue. Let me do my introspection, self-awareness work so that I can get back in it when it works, to get back in it. To really be authentic I think about that.
The thing about this, and I think sometimes this is what people who are taking the course might have difficulty with, is this idea of the constant ever evolving journey, right? And because we are indoctrinated in a society that tells us that the goal is success, and the goal is success within a finite, often short period of time. And so there's some work that each person has to do on their own to transmute that, meaning to understand the controlling nature of that thought, the controlling nature of what success, that there is a success, what success is, and that success has to happen in a finite time. Because like when you don't, the tenets of white supremacy and patriarchy move all throughout that to control us into a space of feeling lacking, of feeling, and that lacking produces fatigue, and that fatigue produces an ability to be controlled and to not seek clarity and all this other stuff. And I will tell folks that for me, one of the things that has helped for me transmuting that idea is coming to a realization that, again, the reality is I'm in this world now. I'm in a world now that is terribly problematic, that is harmful, that is violent, that is so opposite what I believe, what I know is possible. And that I'm not going to see what I want to see, the possibilities I know exist, I'm not going to see in its totality, in a zeitgeist like we have now. But I am going to see it, and I really do use but specifically there, but I am going to see it in very little, in smaller ways, that are reflective of how I'm moving in the world. The more I move with an intention to create less harm, the more I've noticed I then experience pieces of joy through my own experiences or with other people. And that being part of a sort of tapestry that I'm trying to create with the intention that 7 generations from now, the possibility exists that those people will live in a world that white supremacy is dismantled, that that they're like, wow, could you imagine that they lived like this? They did this to each other, like what, that, but like that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. Like I'm here to make that possibility a true possibility and a reality for future generations. And that's enough for me to do the daily work, right? So those two things, doing the daily work does open up experiences of joy that I was not having when I was just moving as white supremacy and patriarchy wants me to move. So I'm creating all this harm to myself and others, and just fatigued and suicidal and depressed and all this shit, so I'm not moving in that anymore. And I also have this vision of, I have this vision of this world that that's just so much different from here. And that, going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation of like, I think 7 generations back, that's my ancestors. I am, and someone has said this, I don't know what, some famous writer said this, and I think it was a Black woman, might have been a man, I don't know. So I am stealing this, I just don't know who said it, but I am for sure their wildest fucking dream. I know that. I know they're my ancestors who were white, my ancestors who were Black, my ancestors who were Native, my ancestors who were Indigenous, like all of them. I'm their wildest fucking dream on so many different fucking levels. And I only hope that I can offer that to 7 generations ahead of me. And that's the work. That's the daily work today to get there for me. But I think each person has to figure that out for themselves as to why the work is, why I want to do it, why I choose to do it, why I wake up every day and choose to be so introspective, self-aware, transparent, and vulnerable.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And also thank you for redefining success, right? Like, I'm just really struck by the choice and agency and liberty you take to do what you need to do to just do more than survive. Like, you're really committed to not living in the confines of what this world has determined success looks like for you. Like, you're like, nah, fuck that shit. I get to decide. I get to choose. Yeah.
Or I would even say dictated. It doesn't determine a goddamn thing.
That's right.
It's dictating some shit.
That's right.
It's dictating some shit. And so transmuting white supremacy is like, no, you don't get to dictate that for me. I do. We want to take a moment and acknowledge the tools used in this podcast are from a course that we have co-created called Cultivating Intersectional Leadership. We believe the path of cultivating intersectional leadership is a transformative journey that supports individuals and organizations in making the deeply systemic, strategic, intuitive, innovative, and necessary shifts away from old ways of being that no longer serve us, our organizations, or our communities. For more information about the course, visit cultivatingintersectionalleadership.com.
We want to thank our brilliant and kind producer, Aaron Rand Freeman. And don't forget, if you'd like to support us, we do appreciate it. You can find us on Patreon, Eyes on Whiteness, and you can rate and leave a review anywhere you're listening to the podcast.